Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the series finale of Better Call Saul and all of its connections to the Breaking Bad universe. This episode, possibly even more so than the Breaking Bad finale, had a ridiculous amount of expectation on it, since not only would it be wrapping up the stories of the characters on Better Call Saul, but that it would also be marking an end of the entire universe and phenomenon of Breaking Bad. As far as we know at the time of creating this video, there are no plans to continue on with any other characters, even though we do see Jimmy and Kim survive the events of this series. Perhaps the most surprising thing about this episode was that it was the first season finale on either show to not feature a character dying. But there were also many callbacks and returning characters within this extensive episode that I will do my best to point out here, and also give you my opinion on how this episode stacks up with the finale of Breaking Bad. But first, I want to thank you for clicking on this video, and ask that if you do enjoy it to help me out by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. The episode begins with Saul and Mike in the desert, sharing a conversation that takes place sometime between the episodes Bagman and Bad Choice Road in the show's 5th season, when Mike and Saul are forced to trek across the desert with Lalo's bail money after being attacked. Mike is the first character to return for this finale, and it was great that this episode started this way, because Saul and Mike were the two characters that fans of Breaking Bad wanted to see more of in another series. It is also interesting that they were talking about going backwards and forwards in time, since that is in effect what we witnessed on Better Call Saul. Saul asks Mike about when he would go back to in time, and Mike laments about the first time he ever took a bribe. This begins this episode's motif of regret and how it can define a person. The first shocking thing that we learned about Mike during the course of Better Call Saul was that he was a dirty police officer in Philadelphia, and this contradictory life led to his son, who was also police, being killed by his fellow officers. Mike was never able to get past this, and it even created the opportunity for him to leave Philadelphia and come to New Mexico, which in turn led to his involvement with Gus Fring and Walter White. The finale shows us that many of these characters were put on this very dangerous path based on decisions that were driven by fear and guilt, and Mike echoes this sentiment when he reveals that if he could stop himself from becoming the man he is now, that he would. After the intro, the episode then begins right where the last one left off, with Saul on the run from the police after escaping Marion's home. Even though Saul is eventually arrested, it does not appear that he is ever charged with the crimes that he committed in Omaha with Jeff. The police are able to find Saul's car and apartment, and he flees through a back window, but is eventually caught in a dumpster. While in the dumpster, Saul attempts to memorize what he would need to say to Ed Galbraith, the man who set Walter White, Jesse Pinkman, and Saul up with new lives, even though Jesse was the only one who didn't eventually screw their new life up. At the police station, Saul overhears the police listening to the same commercial of his that Marion was listening to last episode. He begins to go stir-crazy in the cell, but then has a sort of epiphany when he sees something written on the wall. He then calls Bill Oakley, who immediately drops his papers upon hearing Saul say his name, similar to how Walt surprised his neighbor Carol in the Breaking Bad episode Blood Money.
Hello, Carol.
Saul is then extradited back to New Mexico, and while being led into his meeting with the prosecutors, he notices Marie Schrader, the widow of Hank Schrader. This means that Marie and Walter White are the only two main characters that appear in the finales of both Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. Saul's last appearance on Breaking Bad was in the penultimate episode, Granite State.
Here on out, I'm Mr. Low Profile, just another douchebag with a job and 3 pairs of Dockers. If I'm lucky, a month from now, best case scenario, I'm managing a Cinnabon in Omaha.
After hearing the original plea deal set out by the government, Saul then asks for Mrs. Schrader to enter the room while he explains his defense. This is really Saul at his best, as he uses his knowledge of the legal system to manipulate the prosecutor into a better deal. I love this scene, and it may have been one of my favorites of the entire series. Just like how Walter White would use his vast knowledge of chemicals and science in general to create situations that would provide him with an advantage, Saul does the same here with what he is good at. Both Walter and Saul are characters that at first glance look easy to figure out and possibly even comical, but we see through the events of both series what kind of danger both men are capable of. Also present at the negotiations is another character from Breaking Bad, Austin Ramey, the special agent in charge of the FBI division that Hank was a part of. As the negotiations go more and more his way, Saul also requests to be sent to a prison in North Carolina, stating that if he does not add this provision to his deal, that instead he will be put into general population in a supermax prison in Colorado named ADX Montrose. Even though this seems trivial, Saul did know what he was talking about, because we see at the end of this finale, that exact same prison is where he is sent. This prison is not real, but it is based on one of the highest security federal prisons in the United States, known as ADX Florence, where the infamous drug lord El Chapo and other high-security prisoners are held. Saul also states that he wants mint chocolate chip ice cream sent to him every Friday, This must be Saul's favorite ice cream, as he was also eating it before he got picked up by Nacho in the Season 5 episode titled 50% Off. Saul is surprised to hear that a month before his arrest, Kim willingly admitted to all the events surrounding the death of Howard Hamlin to not only the court but also to his widow. I think that at this point, Saul changes his mind about what he is trying to do, because I believe that once he learned that Kim could be in danger of being sued by Howard's widow, he decides that he has to do something to take the blame for her. I also think that at this point in the story, that this really parallels the end of Breaking Bad, because Walt was willing to turn himself in, but is called back after learning that his meth is still being sold, meaning that Jesse is still in New Mexico. Like Saul, Walter decides to go back after getting away in order to save Jesse in his final moments. So much of both of these characters' stories is about their quest for money and power, and even in this episode, Saul has a hard time admitting that there's anything else that is important to him, but in the end, both Walter and Saul decide to sacrifice themselves for the person that they care most about. In the next scene, we get a flashback to a conversation between Walter and Saul that occurred while both were waiting to escape New Mexico. This conversation takes place during the Breaking Bad episode Granite State, which, as I mentioned earlier, was Saul's last appearance on the series. Saul asks Walter the same question he asked Mike in the opening scene, but Walter is able to deduce that Saul is actually asking about regret. Walter admits that he regrets leaving the company that he started, while Saul gives another glib answer about an incident that caused him to have bad knees. Saul has continually referenced his bad knees throughout both series, and now we know the incident that caused them.
And I'm gonna stand up, all right? Because I got bad knees. I've got bad knees. I think you might have messed up my rotator cuff.
We next see Saul on a plane to North Carolina, where he asks Bill Oakley about Kim's case. If you notice, the airline they are flying on is Wayfarer Airlines, and Wayfarer 515 was the plane that crashed in the Breaking Bad episode ABQ. After hearing that Howard's widow plans to sue Kim, Saul states that he has more to tell the court about the murder of Howard Hamlin. In Florida, Kim receives a call from ADA Susan Erickson about what Saul plans to say about her involvement to the court, which the audience does not hear. Susanna Erickson is one of only a few characters to have appeared in Better Call Saul and the movie El Camino, but not Breaking Bad. Kim appears at Saul's hearing, where he arrives in a flashy suit and asks to be addressed as Saul Goodman. As the judge and prosecutor discuss the plea deal, Saul stands up and demands to make a statement. He begins by stating the same thing he did earlier about his involvement with Walter White, but then continues on by stating that he was not only a willing participant, but that Walter White would have been dead or in jail in a month if he would not have helped him. Saul also admits to his involvement in his brother's suicide and asks that he now be known by his given name, James McGill. This scene is very similar to Walter's confession to his wife Skyler during the final episode of that series, as Walter finally admits that he didn't do what he did for anyone but himself. We are then taken back to events that possibly occurred during the first season of Better Call Saul and see the return of Jimmy's brother Chuck. In a rare moment, it seems like Chuck would like to speak with Jimmy and possibly bond with his brother after years of them fighting. Jimmy, however, is not receptive to this idea and instead rebukes his brother and leaves. This is the event that I think deep down Jimmy wishes that he could change, because this was a time, possibly the only time, that his brother reached out to him like a brother. If Jimmy had stayed and spoke with Chuck that day, it is possible that they would have begun to repair their broken relationship and both would have gone down a happier path. It is made obvious throughout the series that the relationship between these two brothers is what pushed both of them to do horrible things, and now we see that there was a time where all that could have been avoided. There are two interesting props in this scene as well. The first is the lantern that Chuck is carrying, which will ultimately be the device he uses to end his own life in the Season 3 finale. But we also see that Chuck is carrying around the book The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Besides being a talking point this episode, the book was also shown to be in Saul Goodman's house in the first episode this season. Back in 2010, we see Jimmy being transported on a bus. This scene is meant to make you feel like something bad is going to happen to Jimmy, but instead he is recognized by various men on the bus and they begin to chant his alias. This scene is important because one other thing that this series made obvious is that while Saul got out of New Mexico and set up a new life for himself, he was still living like a prisoner, always looking over his shoulder and not able to be himself while living out a mundane existence. This point is accentuated when we see that Jimmy has virtually the same job in prison that he did in Omaha. So while turning himself in was the right thing to do, he basically just traded the prison that he was in for a new one with bars. But now he can live without a guilty conscience, knowing that justice was ultimately served. Kim and Jimmy have one final scene in a prison visitation room where they share a cigarette together. This was the same thing we saw them do way back in the first episode of the series. Kim states that in the end, Jimmy was sentenced to 86 years in prison, much more than the original 30 that he was charged with. As Kim leaves, Jimmy uses the same pointed gun gesture that Kim gave him at the end of last season, acknowledging his life as a criminal. The thing that I like most about this finale is that, like Walter, I think Saul got what he deserved. While Saul was a criminal and his actions made it easier for even worse criminals to hurt people, he didn't deserve to go out in a hail of bullets like Walter White did. I thought using the law and allowing him a chance to reconcile with Kim was really the best ending we could have asked for, and I'm very glad the series ended this way. While I don't think this finale is as mind-blowing as the finale of Breaking Bad, I do think that is an episode I will continue to enjoy the more times I watch it. But let me know what you think in the comments. Was this a good end to the Breaking Bad universe, or do you still want more? Well, that was everything I saw, but let me know in the comments if I missed anything. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please hit that like button if you have enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time on What Did I Miss?